Everybody, we will, it's right at a little after 7 o'clock Eastern time, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Johnny Rogers. I'm an extension associate in the Department of Animal Science at NC State, and this evening we're representing NC State Extension and the NC State Small Ruminant program. So we've been having these webinars the last few months and covering different topics. So we're excited this evening to focus on nutrition and grazing, as part of our operations. We know it's nutrition and feed costs are always going to be the largest expense we have in any type of livestock operations. So it's going to be real exciting to hear our producers this evening that we've got lined up for you to kind of share with us a little bit about their operation, how they address some of the challenges that we face, and some of maybe the opportunities that are out there and related to nutrition. So we've got a great group with us tonight. And with no further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. I'll introduce our panelists as we go. And I think we're going to get started off with Sam Kennedy. Sam's a native of Columbia, Tennessee. He has spent some time in North Carolina during his college years, and now he's back in I call it lower middle Tennessee, and running a multi-species grazing operation. And I know he's had a tremendous amount of experience with small ruminants and grazing and trying to meet their nutritional needs. So, Sam, I'm going to turn it over to you and welcome. And we look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you, Johnny. Let me see if I can get the slideshow shared here and going.
While Sam gets started, if you don't mind, everybody that's on here tonight, if you don't mind putting in where you're from, would like to kind of keep a running tab where everybody's joining us from. So just put in the chat. If you're from North Carolina, put in your county, or wherever you're from at throughout the U.S., put in whatever state and county you're in. So just let us know. Thanks.
All right, guys, can you see the screen okay?
Yes, sir. Looks good.
Okay, we'll get fired off. Like Johnny said, we're in lower middle Tennessee. Been at this farming thing for about 12 years now. We manage a grazing operation that includes cow-calf stockers, ewe lambs, and lamb finishing on about 3,000 acres here in Murray and Hickman County. Of course, tonight we're going to be focusing on the sheep part of the deal. And I think it's really important when you're listening to anybody talk, is you got to understand the context of their situation. Because as you probably heard, every farm's different, and ours continues to evolve every year as we sort of figure this thing out a little bit. But at any rate, I guess we'll get into it. So as far as the sheep operation goes, we have Katahdins, and we want that to be, we need sheep that are adapted to our environment. Relatively low labor, so no shearing, minimal worming, no hoof trimming, and they need to be sheep that can make it on what our ground gives them and raise about 150% weaned, off of grass, which is a goal that I think we're going to hit this year with our mature sheep. It's an optimal input grazing operation that works with nature. For a long time, I've said low inputs, and I think sometimes we've gone a little too far in the low input direction as far as not maybe pushing our animals too hard on not enough nutrition. But that does mean that we always try to match the nutritional needs of the animals to the grass that we have available. We do try to avoid any substitute feeding of the ewes, and I'll talk about how we do that. Currently, we're going to be lambing about 1,000 bred ewes on 700 acres, plus woods ground that goes with that. We've been working on this flock for, like I said, 10 years now, of selecting for animals that don't need a lot of worming, that haven't had to be propped up with year-round supplementation. So I guess just to say that it doesn't happen overnight. Just because our animals can do this. You know, like I said, understand the context of where you are and the sheep you have. And also on that same ground, we'll usually have some kind of seasonal cattle in the summer, either stockers or cows brought over from another part of the farm. So, along with the ewes and lambs, we also finish our lambs, and I consider that a separate enterprise. And we do sort of have a different mindset when it comes to the lamb finishing. We will feed on pasture. And we also put a little bit more inputs into our ewe lamb replacements this year. So part of that too is to bring fertility to a worn out farm. And it takes some of the seasonality out of lamb finishing. So just a little bit about our farm. It's a little odd. I can only see my presentation here, but we are about an hour south of Nashville. We get 56 average inches of rain. We are in fescue country, similar to most of your state, but with our rotational grazing and longer rest periods, we do have a fair amount of diversity in our pastures. Up until now, we have not done a lot of fertilization of our fields. Not saying right or wrong. Not saying we won't do that in the future, but that's sort of what we're working with when you see a lot of broom sedge in the background. We have done a fair amount of overseeding with annuals and legumes. We're always moving the sheep. As a general rule of thumb, I like them to come on to pasture that's at least 45 days rested. Not all the parasites are gone by then, but that's sort of a minimum bar I like to keep, unless I'd graze it with another species prior to that in the growing season, like cattle. Typically, we're never on one spot more than 3 days, and that's for grass reasons and for parasite reasons. So, especially during the growing season, we'll do some more back grazing in the winter. So, to show y'all quickly, to accomplish that, I'm going to try to share this, and let me know if y'all can see it. We use tools. And y'all see this pasture map screen?
Yeah, there you go. That's better. Yeah, you can zoom us in a little bit.
Yeah, so here's Nashville up here. Here's what's left of the Middle Tennessee Basin down here on the western edge. These are our cattle operations, and then we're going to go zoom down here to the sheep deal. All of these permanent pastures the solid lines are permanent fencing, which Greg Brann on the line here has helped me design over the years. And I will say I wouldn't do all this permanent fencing until you've done it for a long time and you want to know where to put them. But it does allow us to control the animals quite a bit. One thing we pay attention to a lot this time of year, especially when running dry ewes, is just strictly quantity harvested, because their nutritional needs are not that high. So you can see the sheep are here, and we keep track of the rest days. Like this field here has had 9 rest days, and this field we just came off of, it tells me how many animal days that I harvested. So this is one thing I use when I'm planning to ration out my grass in the wintertime and not have to feed hay. I'll generally know in the fall how many grazing days I have ahead, how many animal days I need to harvest off of each field. So for those of you farmers out there, it's almost like a yield meter. So we got 55 animal days per acre off of the last field we grazed. I've been wanting to get 60, which is really sort of pushing it with sheep. But that's kind of one of our major tools for monitoring rest periods and how much we're actually harvesting off of each of these fields. Let me get back to my presentation here. So, how much time are probably about halfway through, but I thought, the topic of this is nutrition and supplementation. So I thought probably the best way to do that is just to go through my grazing year and the things I'm thinking about with each class of sheep that I have during that year. I will say that mineral is about the only thing that we supplement year round. And that could be a 30-minute presentation on its own, but for now, it is important for sheep in our environment. I think with our sort of washed out high rainfall soils, we do a custom mineral right now. We make our own. We've tried about everything out there, but as of right now, we take forage samples and we're mixing our own mineral. And that's primarily for cost savings, but also a precision thing. So right now, this time of year, we're still grazing top stockpiled fescue. You can see the glove there. There's a lot of biomass there in our good stockpile. And of course, there's no fertilization there. So there's a lot of brown. We were in a D3 last fall also. So I do feel good that we're still grazing this year, considering the circumstances that we had last fall. But that's plenty good enough feed for a dry ewe, which is what we have right now, dry bred ewes. And that's one of the great advantages of sheep versus cattle that I like, is that you can run a dry ewe so much of the year. Thought y'all might be interested in this. Just hammering down grass. They hungry. Eating seed heads and digging through the snow. There's some green under there. That was 2 weeks ago. Y'all might have had the same big storm that we did, but it was interesting to see that, you know, those ewes are eating dried, stockpiled warm season forages there. And we're still getting pretty good utilization despite the snow. So that's what I like this time of year with a dry ewe. That's about all you need. As long as you got a little bit of that green fescue underneath, they'll be okay, and ours do okay. So we're not feeding them anything else now. We'll have to give them bigger cuts. You know, we want to get our harvested days per acre as much when it snows or rains, but we adjust. As we get further in the spring, this picture is 1 week before lambing last year. You can see at least these fields are mostly fescue. There's some clover in there, but they're not grazing nubbins. The grass is coming on strong. You can see the ewes are in good condition. Again, this is sort of a controversial one. A lot of people will supplement an energy like a grain right before lambing. I'm not saying we won't ever do it, but so far with our sheep, we have gotten by with just grass. Now, part of that is we push our lambing farther into the spring, so the grass has a little more strength before we really get into it. So if you're lambing, for example, earlier in the season, you know, you may need to supplement a little bit more. So that'll have its own, you know, maybe you don't have as many parasite issues if you're in the winter or earlier in the season, which is, you know, another reason we've selected more for more parasite resistant animals over the years, so we could more match nutrition with grass available. We'll say we do push some lime, some calcium and magnesium supplement this time of year because we have had some hypocalcemia issues, but didn't really last year. Lambing's 35 days from late April, and I want it definitely to be over with by May because the grass is too tall, but you can kind of see what our world looks like that time of year. Highest quality forage available of our year to match up with the highest, you know, nutritional needs of those developing fetuses and early lactating ewes. Shortly after this, our worm seasons will start to turn on too. So you're looking at a fescue field, but within, by May 1st, you got all of it out there for us. So I'm leaving through. Doing a little bit of drift lambing this year. Doing them twice a day. That's just the drop since this morning. Probably not. How many have been born today, Ron? 50 maybe? 70. I'm leading through. So on that video, I just wanted to show you that we adjust how fast we're moving them, how big of cuts they get, and during lambing, when we're doing drift lambing, right now our procedure is to move them twice a day. We'll process the lambs born in that half day, and then we keep the breds moving forward. After lambing, it's just max nutrition. You can see the picture on the left. Those are some of our native warm season grass cuts. They've got clover, they've got big blue stem, they've got Indian. Big diversity down here. Lots of no good cow food, but lots of good sheep food in that river bottom. One of my lessons learned from last year is they need more max nutrition. I think I limited them a little too much, and the lambs got a little wormy. One thing we do now, and you can see a picture here, is we do start creep feeding. So this is for the lambs, and I think it's part of our environment, just that our grass is just not that strong compared to some other environments, and we have such a high parasite load. I want those lambs to have all the nutrition they can until they get up to about 60 pounds and they can have their own resistance. We have different kinds of feeders, but that's generally what we do. That's one that I'm not sure we'll do forever. It's kind of a lot of work, but I think we'll continue it this year. And then you get to weaning in July, and then again, you get back to dry ewes there in July and August. This was sort of an experiment, a drought kind of thing. We didn't have the same amount of stocker cattle we usually have, and I had some river bottoms get away from me. But you can see the giant ragweed, there's eastern gamma, there's cockaburs, there's everything in there. And it was, well, for reference, you can see the four-wheeler there about how high it is. And we put those dry ewes in there and put them to work right after weaning. And you can see what I was amazed at how high they stripped it down, but it bought us a bunch of animal days that allowed us to rest those stockpile pastures or fescue pastures. And getting those days out of that river bottom back in August was critical to us still being able to graze now. In the summer, after we wean, the lambs are still on pasture. They're still getting rotated. Usually it's a weekly rotation, but they also have full access to a feed. It's not a high starch ration. It usually is a soy hull based thing that doesn't mess their rumen. And that is we found that we don't want to short ewe lamb development. And also, it again depends on your context. We have a market for finished lambs that as soon as we can get them done, we can get them gone. So that's new. There's been a big, we've done that for 3 years. I'll say there's a learning curve to feeding also, a big time learning curve. And then you get back to the fall. Our next stop is breeding and flushing. We will start marketing lambs in October, finished lambs for the ewes. And this is another controversial one, or maybe not controversial, but it depends on the body condition of the ewes as to whether you flush with an energy supplement prior to breeding. We traditionally have not, and our breed ups have been fine. Our mature ewes are usually breeding at about 160% without flushing. This year, because of the drought, and you can see though, we aren't starving them either. Those ewes are on they have plenty of stockpile pasture. This is November. They're in good body condition. But this year we did try feeding a little bit the 2 weeks prior to breeding and into breeding, primarily because of the drought. And we were using that same high fiber soy pellet to both flush the ewes and try to extend our pasture, get a few more grazing days out of our pasture, using not that exact trip hopper, but basically a cake feeder and putting it out on the ground. You can see the long line of ewes. It was okay, but it really just makes the sheep miserable. Makes me not like fooling with the sheep. So I don't know. I will avoid that if I can in the future. And it kind of worked, but I didn't like it. We're going to skip this video just because I'm running out of time. But I will say, I guess, particularly on ewe lamb development in the past, we've run them with the ewes and I think stunted their growth. And we would typically get breed ups of 50 to 70%. This year actually ran the ewe lamb separately, gave them the choice of that feed on pasture, and our breed up was 90%, and they scanned at like 140 or something. So that'll be interesting come lambing time. That's still somewhat of an experiment for us, but there you go. Those are the nutritional stages of our sheep and why we do things the time of year we do them. So.
Outstanding, Sam. Thank you for that. I should have told everyone up front. I think if you have a burning question you need to ask that you want to ask now, you can put that in the chat and we'll take a few of those, and we will also have a Q&A at the end with all of our speakers, at one time. So we thought it might be good to kind of go through each presentation and go from there. So I think there might be maybe one question here. One thing I would note, it looks like we're covered from coast to coast. I know I saw some from far out eastern North Carolina, and I saw a few folks there from California, I think, and maybe as far north as New York and down into Georgia. So that's good. Question from Tanner. Sam, are you not having to trim due to ewes eating forage? So footwork on your sheep.
I'd say it's primarily a culling and thing. A long time ago, I decided I wasn't going to be in the sheep business if I have to trim feet. So that's part of over the years. If we've had some that had to be trimmed habitually, they've gone. So, and then yeah, our lambs on feed, their hooves grow a little bit more, but even those, I can tell, like even like our ram lambs and ewe lambs, the ones that have growthy feet are gone. We don't keep those. So.
Very good. Well, that's all questions for now. I know I've got several here for the after discussion, but great job, Sam. We appreciate you getting us kicked off in a good way. Our next speaker will be Mr. Greg Brann, and let me get over here. Oh man, Greg Brann. Someone made Greg co-host. Not yet, but I just did. Okay, Greg, you should be able to share your screen. Little introduction for Greg. Greg is a veteran grazer. Been grazing for a long time over there in I'd call that upper middle Tennessee, southern south central Kentucky, I guess is what I would call it. We'll see how Greg defines it. But I've been to Greg's place, and again, he's somebody like Sam that certainly talks the talk and walks the walk. Always been really impressed with what I've seen at Greg's place. Greg is retired now from NRCS, was there for a long time, and I just think does a really good job with his grazing program. And I think as far as an educator, he's probably done as good a job and as much as anyone in this part of the country for educating, others and helping them improve their operations. So Greg, we're just really thrilled to have you on here with us, and welcome to the Small Ruminant webinar this evening. I'll turn her over to you.
All right. Thank you, Johnny. And wow, Sam, you did a great job there. I ought to give you some more of my time. But let me get this on full screen. I think that'd be a little better. Yeah, I've kind of lost track of how many years I've been doing this with the small ruminants, but about 23 years. Can y'all see my screen?
Not yet.
Oh, really?
I think you need to
Okay.
share it.
All right, let me go back. I thought I did that, but let's do it again. Is it not coming up? Let's see, multiple participants. I don't know. Is that doing it, Johnny, or not?
Not yet. Are you mashing don't mash the little arrow, mash the large green button there, share screen, not just the smaller part.
Right.
Maybe.
Huh. I'm hitting share screen, but I don't guess it's doing it.
I'd have to get somebody younger to come in here and tell us what we're
Yeah.
doing wrong. So. Dr. Weaver, what are we doing wrong?
Let me go. Here we go. Maybe I need to hit that
There it
share.
is.
That's much better.
It.
It's a different share. Okay. Now, are we there?
Yeah, now put it on
That's it.
presentation mode.
Okay, put it on presentation.
Yes, sir, and you'll be perfect.
All right. All right. Uh, Yeah, I'm just gonna cover some of the fundamentals that we do and just how we're going about the nutrition and all the soil the small ruminant management. So we hadn't fertilized in about, oh, I guess it's 16 years now, but we do soil test and keep it in the medium high range. And the small ruminants are a big part of that. Their manure is just perfect for just like fertilizer and the little pellets. But managing the minimum heights is very important. And I'm also into soil health big and want to improve the land all the time. And we too have multi paddocks, water distributions like water running a water district here. Yeah, and thought it might be good to cover some of the reasons we have small ruminants, and of course weed control, that nutrient cycling. The sheep almost, if you have grass, they're not going to eat hay. In fact, they can overgraze if you let them. So sometimes we have to go to a sacrifice area. But the sheep will reduce the spot grazing that might come with just cattle alone. They also don't share important internal parasites, so you can reduce parasite needs or internal parasite needs for both cattle and sheep by running them together or leader follower. We mainly run them together, one herd. As I believe as Idaho State did some research and we found it to be true, you can increase your stocking rate on the farm by about 24% by adding sheep to a cattle operation. Their breeding age is, of course, much lower. Breed at 10 months old or thereabouts, and their short gestation's a big thing. And then the lambs wean off at a mother's weight. So I'm talking about 1.5 lambs would equal mother's weight within a year or less. And we're all grass. We don't feed any grain because we're direct marketing all of our animals. Of course, increased income's a big thing. As Sam does, we're big into culling, and the foot trimming question came up. We'll trim a few hooves, but not many. We'll trim probably out of, right now we only have about 150, 180 ewes, and out of those we'll probably trim 10 to 20 feet a year, something like that. So we're big on the culling, and we want them to be resilient. We do some fall hay feeding. This is a picture with, you just see the cattle there, but we've got sheep out there too. We'll do that so we can grow more grass in the fall. We've been doing that for, I don't know, about 8 years now. And there's what we're after is the stockpiled grass. Like Sam said, the last couple of years have been rather dry and a little harder to grow the grass we'd like to, but we try to stockpile at least 90 days worth of grass in some of the paddocks at all times of the year, so that we have that reserve for drought or of course the long winter. And then we ration graze. During the growing season, we'll rotate about 1 to 3 days on and an average of 45 days off, but it could vary from 30 to 90 days during the growing season. And then in the winter or fall, we'll sometimes rest it as much as 180 or more days and save some back for early spring. If we're running low on stockpile grass, then we'll put the cattle, we'll separate and put the cattle on hay, and the sheep will graze the the remaining grass that we have. And then when all the grass gets down to 2 inches, it's time to put them all on hay, and don't like to sacrifice more than or graze lower than recommended heights, which is 3 inches or so. In the winter, we might take it down to 2 inches, but try not to graze any more than 10% of the pasture low at any one time. So yeah, we're managing for leaf area. We try to keep the desirable plants above the undesirables. And top third grazing is our go-to on grazing management. But we practice all forms of grazing management. We've found that managing the leaf area and cover and residue, we'll have more moisture down on the ground, more soil life, and this is what I'm after I pull back the grass, the sward of grass. I want to see the ground just tilled up and lots of earthworm castings. They're about 5 times more fertile than the surrounding soil. So this is what we want to see on every field. Not that every field is like this, but this is our target. And we can do that by managing more cover. That's some wool sheep. We've got hair sheep and wool sheep. We can't run the wool sheep with the hair sheep because the hair sheep contaminate the wool. So we have to run them separate. Sometimes we'll bring in some cattle to be with the wool sheep just to graze down some of the even orchard grass. The wool sheep will leave some clumps, and to get more efficient use of that, we'll sometimes add some dry cows to the mix. Here's some goats and wool sheep. They don't contaminate the wool, so we'll sometimes run them. We were breaking them to hot wire. I know Sam had 2-wire temporary cross fence, and we do that, and I think Jim does too. And here's some goats. The only reason I have goats is weed control. But they're wonderful at that. I've got 180 acres that's just coming out of a CRP type program. And so we needed to add goats back to our program to control those weeds. We're not organic certified, but we don't use any herbicides. We've got guardian dogs. We've got about 10 guardian dogs right now. And this is a dog feeder, and pretty important, I think, into the sheep and goat management is to have that dog feed in the field where the animals are. I used to let them go through the gate and get their feed outside, but it's a lot better to feed in the paddock that they're in. We do some bale grazing, and the cattle are held back with a single wire, and then the sheep are held back with 2 wires. But that allows the sheep to get to some of the hay, more selection of hay, because I've brought roll of hay into a field before, and sheep would be all around it, and then 5 minutes later, after the cattle get there, there's no sheep around it. We also unroll some hay, and I like that the best, but the bale grazing saves us a lot of time. So when we have a lot of other projects going, we'll bale graze. But when we can, we unroll, and that gives the sheep plenty of room to access hay as well. And it can improve our land we find that in about 3 to 5 years, we can make our worst field one of our best. Johnny wanted us to mention the supplements. When everything's turned brown, we'll use some all natural protein tubs. We put decox in a chelated mineral, and then we also have just a garlic mineral mix for all stock. Used to worry about the high copper and the sheep, but we're not worried about that anymore. I'd say in general, we're feeding 1,800 part per million copper. On hay, sheep need better hay than cattle. When we're buying hay for sheep, we want it to be 140 RFV or higher. It's important to have good hay with sheep and goats. They'd rather die as to eat bad hay. I wanted a little advertisement for a pasture walk I have every year. Been doing it over 20 something years. Actually it's a lot longer than that, but this year it's October 17th, and invite people to come visit, and it's just a conversation, and we'll take it from there. But I think that's my last slide.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate it. And I'd highly recommend that pasture walk. I know I went a couple of years ago and just hadn't got to go since, and I really miss that. So it's definitely worth the trip for sure. So we did have a third speaker lined up, Jim Malooly, with Silicon Ranch, was going to talk to us about kind of grazing sheep again, but he got tied up. I'm pretty sure he's in the middle of lambing right now, and his text said something about the day just spiraled, kind of downhill. I think we can all relate to that. So we will give him a bye on this, and hope things are better tomorrow for him. But anyway, he apologizes for not being able to be here. So, but the good news is we've got all of us again, and Adam shared with me again. We are coast to coast, and a lot of folks here. So I had some good questions so far, and I know we'll do some Q&A with all our participants, and certainly Sam and Greg can lead the way. So Sam, first question goes to you. I know Greg mentioned a little bit about his predator control. It says you're rotating over 700 acres. What do you do to minimize predator pressure?
The main thing is guardian dogs. We run all flavors of the white dogs, but mainly Akbash. At present, I think I need a dog per 100 ewes, and that sort of leaves me a little bit of extra in case I lose one. But a combination of good fences, and of course they're always grouped in one paddock, more or less, right? It's not like those sheep are spread out over 700 acres. They're going to be in no more than 10 acres at a time, and so the dog can cover them well, and so that dogs and fences.
It looked like you had a significant amount of wooded area on your farm, so, or your operation. So there would be significant coyote pressure there if I had to guess.
Yeah, and even yes, and so like when we got young lambs, I keep them out of the woods, and even with all that, they'll still take their tacks a little bit, not too bad, but we tag them all at birth, so I have an idea of what I'm losing between birth and weaning, and so, but it's whatever, not enough to keep us from doing it. So
Sounds good. Greg, do you have any thoughts on predator, or want to expand a little bit on what you're doing?
We have shown benefits from tightening up the area they're on and getting them away from woods. I think we're going to do more of that in the future. Yeah, I hate to do it. I like them out there on a bigger area, but yeah, during that lambing time, and kidding, and I think goats are worse than the sheep as far as coyotes. Seem like they've got a better, maybe because I can even catch a goat, hard to catch little lambs. So yeah, but we do tighten up the area that they're on during the lambing.
Sam, I've got another one for you. Do you have permanent water sources in each pasture, or a mobile unit that moves with the sheep?
on our and I've sort of gotten skipped over a lot of the infrastructure talk, but that's one of our strengths is, and Greg just helped me a lot with this over the years. We highly utilize the beginning farmer cost share to put in. So we have pipe on our home farm owned land. We have all piped water to all those fields you see. On some leases, we'll use over the top, like black pipe that we can take with us, and we'll use a water trailer on one place if we have to. But in our country, we have good water everywhere, good access to wells, and especially with the cost here, it's worth it to go ahead and put a pipe in.
Good deal. Greg, do you have any thoughts on the fixed versus flexible water systems? I know that's certainly something you've done through your whole career. Or any words of wisdom there?
I really like those permanent water troughs. Is less trouble, but we use a lot of quick couplers and 55-gallon Rubbermaid troughs with a Jobe megavolt flow valve, and works real well. We do put a hot wire across it, at least some form of wire across it. Cattle are worse, of course, getting in troughs than sheep and goats. But then we've got concrete blocks in the tire troughs so that the lambs can escape if they do get in there. I have lost several over the years in deeper water. They get knocked in or whatever, and I can't get out. So we found the blocks to be the best for that, and a high water level is important. I don't use anything other than hoses, just a water hose for the temporary water. I don't use the black pipe.
Gotcha.
In general, ours is all owned land, so I don't know. I feel like I can pick out where the water line needs to be good enough to go ahead and put it underground. So,
Yeah, very good. Greg, just for perspective, how much land are you managing? So what's the scope of your operation and scale there?
right. It varies a good bit because I lease from my brother, and land's coming and going. But right now I have 400 acres of pasture land plus 180 of CRP land, which I wouldn't call pasture just yet because there's really no grass on it. And that's where I'm feeding hay right now. I don't like it, but that land needs manure on it and needs disturbance. So that's where we are. What's that put us up to? About 600 acres of pasture potential. And I like, running the one herd and the cows and the sheep and all together. I like one ewe per acre in that scenario. When I've gotten up to 2 to 3 with running with the cows, problems start happening with the small ruminants. So we like that ratio of 1 to 1 acre. Again, that's with cattle. So,
And just for those that are on the webinar from other environments, you guys are both in that 45, 50-inch rainfall area in that Great Basin.
yeah, I think we're more like 60 recent years, but yeah, a lot of water.
It's just the distribution is not very good sometimes. Sounds like.
Sometimes, usually, yeah, when we want it in October, it's not. But if you look at historic rainfall, it's 3.5 inches a month. It looks perfect on the historic, but
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really happen that way.
Yeah. Here's a question. Either one of you could handle this probably from Stephanie. Can you explain what it means to stockpile grass or pastures? So both y'all talked about that quite a bit. So what does that mean?
Go ahead, Sam.
I mean, I guess put it in a savings account, I guess. But part of the point of moving the animals around and having them all grouped in one pasture is that your other pastures are allowed to rest. So that does a bunch of different things for you. But number one, if they're resting, they're not getting grazed. So you have this standing pasture that instead of cutting and feeding as hay, you can use temporary fencing or permanent fencing to ration out. So the animals only get what they need for a day or for a couple of days instead of access to the whole farm. But that's using stockpile pasture as your primary tool for cutting feed costs in any grazing operation.
Yeah, if we didn't have dry times and winter time, then and it had perfect growth, we'd just keep it at 6 inches high because that's the perfect height for the animal to get a bite of. But it's not perfect growing conditions, and we know that dry times are coming and we know winter's coming. So we've got to grow grass when we can grow it and hold it, reserve it, put it in that savings account for when we can't grow grass.
Somewhat related to that, what is CRP and RFV, the relative feed value you talked about, Greg? You want to expand on those just a little bit more?
Yeah, CRP, mine is actually CREP, which is it's a version of CRP, which is Conservation Reserve Program. And it's run by the Farm Service Agency, and the whole US has CRP available. Usually it's a cropland thing, and there's soil rental rates. It's very, visit with Farm Service Agency to get the full scope of it, but it's a set aside program, and some of the CRPs can be grazed. The one I was in could not be grazed. You have to pay something to get it out and graze it or hay it under certain circumstances, but they pay you to not graze it. And it's a set aside program for about 10 years. Mine was for 15 years. It was real lucrative. The one I was in, CREP, is an incentive also from other entities like the Nature Conservancy pays, as well as the federal government. Yeah, so that's CRP. RFV is just relative feed value, and it's like stemming alfalfa is a 100. So 100 is not a perfect grade. That's not good enough, not for sheep. We wanted about 140. Would you agree with that, Johnny?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a quality. It's looking at stem and leaf ratios and protein, and it's just looking at the whole thing without digging into all the breakdowns of energy and protein. And it's a quick way of looking at forage quality. There's other ways to look at it too, but that's a simpler one.
Mm-hmm. Eva had a similar question that I know it came up to me, and it's just out of curiosity more than anything for me, but how are hair sheep going to contaminate the wool on wool sheep? Is it just rubbing and?
Yeah, they lay together and that they're shedding constantly. And yeah, so I'm new to wool sheep. My wife's the one running the wool sheep, but wool sheep are kind of like dairy cattle. If they have a bad, um, if they get sick, or if they have bad grass for a short time, they have breaks in the fiber, and that shows up, and they so they're a barometer of their history of growing that wool. But yeah, back to the contamination. It's mainly just the shedding from the hair sheep is the problem.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Here's a question about how do you determine what vitamins or minerals that you need? Can you tell it by looking at the animal, or does it go deeper than that? Vitamin mineral supplementation. Sam, you want to lead off on that?
Yeah, I mean, usually no. I mean, there's some things you can tell if they're an extreme deficiency or excess, but in my case, we take forage samples and they tell you what minerals are in the forage, and then I work with a nutritionist who knows what sheep nutrient requirements are to come up with a mineral that meets our forage's deficiencies. There's some like grass tetany, sort of extreme neurological diseases that usually by the time you see them in a sheep, it's too late anyways. But so no, I guess you got to test. Is I will say too, while it's on my thought of testing, whenever we have a dead one, we try to send off the liver So that'll tell us, how effective our mineral supplementation program is. Mostly we look at copper, selenium, and zinc levels on that deal. So
Yeah, I would think if you can work with a private nutritionist, to kind of help you work through some of those complex nutritional issues. Some of the feeds companies have nutritionists that they can kind of offer, and certainly your extension service, depending on the state you're in, most counties in each state are covered by someone who has some experience. And of course, they have access to specialists at the university, a small ruminant specialist that could help with that, formulation of those supplements. So, Greg, any particular thoughts on minerals or supplementation?
Yeah, I've done some forage testing and it came back. I just did it one time for the mineral aspects. It came back real good, not much lacking. So, but yeah, I want the highest selenium I can get in there, and then I want a high copper because that helps with parasite resistance too. Um, and then 2 parts calcium to 1 part phosphorus. Um, and that's basically it. I rotate mixed minerals around. I'll feed a sheep mineral one time, then a cattle mineral, and then a high selenium Redmonds. Those 3 are the main ones that I try to have them available where they can choose out of those 3, but I know that's not recommended a lot of times, but that's what we do.
Got another question here, maybe more of a veterinarian issue, but experienced shepherds might want to weigh in on it. Got a 20-day-old lamb that's not nursing very well from its dam and not taking the bottle very well either. So I know sometimes that's just very frustrating when you provide everything you can and it just doesn't work. So any thoughts from you guys on that?
It wouldn't survive here. But I mean, you can tube feed it and just to keep it going. And um, I I don't know. It's a lot of work. If it's not wanting to nurse, something's wrong. I'd
Yeah,
tube feed it a few days maybe, and then just give up on it.
yeah. That's kind of been our experience is, it's just sometimes they just don't have the will to, and maybe there's something wrong internally, developmentally. They just, but if it's lived 20 days, it's like I say, usually they don't make it a couple of days. So, anyone else want to weigh in on that in our panel of experts? Dr. Weaver, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would follow follow along with what's already been stated and try to get a fair amount of nutrients into it for a few days. And if that doesn't give it enough energy to suckle on its own, yeah, something's probably wrong and it's probably not going to make it.
Yeah. I think I don't know if this is the same lamb or a different one, but lambs that kind of hunched up in their back, is that a symptom of white muscle disease or something else? I know the way I would respond to that is kind of unthriftiness. There is something wrong there. I don't know that it'd necessarily be white muscle disease, but
I would guess it's an orphan.
yeah, hungry lambs.
Yeah,
Usually hunch
yeah.
up in the back sometimes. So
They're hungry or cold. Those are usually the first 2 things that come to mind when I see one like that. I mean, it could be any number of things, but that seems to be the most common in my experience.
next question in our chat is from Paige, and she's from the Pacific Northwest. So Paige, welcome. Do you have advice on how to assess the grasses we have in our pastures? And with that info, how do we determine if they are getting enough nutritional value from their grasses? So I guess, Greg, I know NRCS kind of helps folks with things like that, kind of assessing pastures, scoring pastures, and of course it's a different environment. But what advice would you have for Paige?
Well, sounds like she's wanting a nutritional analysis of it. You could do a grab sample as if it was for hay. Just try to select what you think the animals are going to eat. And if I was doing that, I would go to all the pastures that at one time, just any one point in time, I'd go to several pastures that you're going to be rotating across for that season. And then I'd send it off. Um, the animals are going to select a higher quality than you do usually, but it's going to be pretty high quality if you have a lot of grass and you're just choosing leaf. Um, I there's also a pasture condition score that you can run. I think that's what Johnny was mentioning there, and it's a good program for or assessment for how good a pasture it is, and it's looking at desirable plants, percent legumes, residue cover, a number of diversity, a number of things. So it's online. You can find that and run through that sheet and go through it. There's another one that it's called Determining Indicators of Pasture Health, DIPH. And I really like it too. It's just being developed actually, but you look at a reference site and you compare all the pastures to that reference site, and it's much like range management. You're saying here's the state that I think is maybe not climax, but the target state that I want my pasture to be in. And then you compare to that and say I'm at a lower state or I'm there. You could do it on your own farm and say, here's my best field now. Now, comparatively, where do these other pastures rate?
Yeah, I read the rest of her question there. Southwest Washington State. So her environment probably, I think that is the less brittle part of Washington State, if I remember right. So they may have a pretty decent amount of rainfall, maybe some similar grasses to what we would have. But she mentions inputs like hay, oats, barley, grain pellets, supplements, salts, and mineral. And yes, all those are options, I guess, is the way I would kind of sum that up. It's, just putting that together, and you may want to, work with some local folks there with Extension or to Washington State University, maybe that could help put together a system. I always like to think it's kind of like a puzzle, and things kind of have to fit together. So, question, have you tried AU Grazer Cerisa lespedeza for the barber pole worm? So,
I have. It looks like most any other Sericia. Sericia you always kind of cringe when you mention Sericia because it's outlawed in some states. And we got people from all over the US. If there's somebody from Kansas, just mute me right now. No, because Sericia is a noxious weed in some areas, and people either love it or they hate it. It's got tannins in it, and any plant with tannins is a natural dewormer. But Sericia is known to be the king of natural dewormers if they'll eat it. Even sheep and goats don't love Sericia lespedeza. Now, annual lespedeza is different. It's not noxious like Sericia can be. But then in hay, it loses some of the tannins, but it still has enough tannins to be a natural dewormer. It works. It's no doubt it works. But leaf shatter's terrible. So you need a bottom in the trough so that you capture those leaves. It's really important for it to be cut when it's smaller, like 18 inches or less, and because it can be all stems. It's a cut one day and bale the next. I've had Sericia in a field and I'd graze cattle through it. They wouldn't eat the Sericia, and then I'd cut it for hay, and that way I got the best of both. If you want to reduce Sericia, and some people do because they don't like it, In this area, if you cut it from about September 1 on through frost, it'll kill it. It'll take a few years, but it will disappear after a few years.
Sam, have you done any work with improved Lespedizas?
Not a ton. We broadcast a little bit of annual Lesbedisa, but we generally don't worry about single species. Don't try to get too lost in the weeds, so to speak, I guess, worrying about one species. But I was going to add back on the nutrition question. I feel like we didn't test for a year. You don't have to do all this specific testing. I don't know what the experience level of the person asking the question is, but you can just talk to your extension agent and like find out what what have people been doing in your area for a long time, and really all the testing is important, but nothing beats daily observation, and your animals will tell you, whether they're happy or not, whether they're full. You'll get to know them and look at their gut feel and look at their manure and look at how they're chewing cud and whether they're laying down, or all kinds of different things that needed to be added in addition to the testing, which really kind of comes later, I think.
Good point. Good point. Also had some comments in the chat about the lamb we were dealing with the poor appetite. The ewe could have mastitis, and that certainly could be one of the issues too. Certainly needs to be checked out. Here's a grazing question, a grazing height question. Any reason not to allow sheep to eat down the grass very low in the winter, as long as you get them off the pasture before spring growth? So talking about residual forage left over in the winter.
Yeah, I want to touch on that one. The stem base is where most of the carbohydrate storage is for regrowth, not the roots. And so that bottom 2-3 inches is very important for regrowth. And the way to check that is just have one area and leave some leaf area or stem for early spring, and you'll see huge difference in the regrowth. If you want to see a miracle, manage some with, say, 3 inches of stubble or residual height through the winter, and then the others graze down to 1/2 inch, and it's miraculous what you can see. And plus, the parasite load is much higher anytime you graze below 5 inches. So another problem we have in this area is meningeal worm. It's carried from snails, and you graze low, you're going to have more meningeal worm. And more coccidia.
Well, here's a good question. What's the best fertilizer for a pasture, and what's the best way to do it?
Sam, why don't you start?
That's got one straightforward answer. That's all.
I don't know. It's kind of like the mineral thing. It depends on, which soil test you believe in and whether it gets a long rabbit hole. But so I don't know. We have done soil testing. We have not spent any money about it. That's part of the reason I have noticed that where we bale graze, for example, and where we feed lambs. So in my mind, I'm going to bring the nutrition straight to the animals and let them poop out fertility. And that way, at least I know if I'm spending that money, it's getting to the animals. That being said, there's some of our fields that still just haven't turned on, and I'm sure they probably need some fertility after years of farming and not putting back, not from us, but from previous management. So, yeah, Greg, you take over, Greg.
Yeah,
for now, we're feeding it through for now.
Our main reason for soil testing is to see where we need to feed hay and manage more intensively for manure. So the manure they're dropping is the best fertilizer. Not to say that if you're not doing a rotational grazing and somewhat high density of animals, then just soil test and apply what's recommended. Nitrogen typically isn't tested, so it's from an organic perspective, it's the least important. Phosphorus and potash and pH are the more important things. I don't put on any fertilizer. I hadn't done it in 16 years, and Sam used the word turned on, and I think that's very appropriate. The land, it becomes turned on after a while doing the regenerative type management, and managing the height is the most important thing. That in this area, in the growing season, we want to be at least really 4 inches. I like to leave 6 inches, but and then high density grazing, short duration is important to get that manure distribution. With sheep, it's a little different, but we're typically targeting somewhere around 30,000 to 70,000 pounds of animal per acre. With sheep, it's going to be lower. What's your stock density, Sam, with your sheep?
It's typically lower, but in this winter we've sort of been pushing it. What we're running 102 acres a day on 120 animal units. So what is that? 60 to 70,000 pounds an acre, somewhere in there.
That's great.
That's pretty tight. That's tighter than we've ever done. So
yeah, that's very high for sheep. Usually it's around 20,000 or so, but
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that fertilizer question is I heard somebody said somewhere that, the best thing you can add to the, soil amendment to a pasture, the best thing you can add is the footprints of the manager, basically. And I think that's important because you need to be out there and making observations and looking at those things. And then, it may lead to actually some purchasing of fertilizer, lime, other things. And I think soil testing has a place there. I know our state lab can kind of provide you, some basic soil test that kind of relies on chemistry. And then there's some other labs now that are doing some of the more intense soil health testing. And but again, making good observations, and again, visiting with other farmers, kind of see what they're doing. Successful farmers that are kind of going the same direction you want to go would be a good good way to start on that fertilizer deal. Another question here, as you are improving your pastures and testing forages, what are the key components calculations you use to grade a pasture? They go on to say they have a ton of wetter areas that have sedge. We are making improvements, but what should we be using to grade a pasture? That's one question I had for you, Sam, about maybe I can blend that in with this question on the pasture map. Do you see a lot of variation in that from year to year? Like one pasture, is it improving over time, or does the rainfall kind of drive the productivity of one pasture year to year, or how would you grade your pastures, or do you track pasture production with pasture map?
yeah, I mean we track how many animal days, or another way you could say how many pounds essentially we've harvested off of each field. And I guess we've been running it 4 years now, but I can definitely tell, like, for example, on another farm, we have some pastured poultry, not us, but that field where we've been running the chickens the longest consistently produces more grazing days than the ones right next to it who haven't had that fertility input. I will say overall, like, we have some fields that are strictly warm season traps. Like, but overall, our most productive pastures are mixed, are diverse pastures. It's a fescue base, but it has a lot of warm seasons in it, and those typically are the ones we get the most grazing days out of a year. If we do start applying fertility inputs, I have looked at, I've done UT soil testing. I've looked at sort of the Albrecht Kinsey type soil testing. I've looked at the Haney test, but we will definitely, if we spend the money to apply inputs, we'll definitely look and see if the following years we get more carrying capacity off of those fields. So, and back on the manure thing, little tricks. We spend a fair amount of time thinking about where our sheep camp at night, especially a group of 1,000. That will leave a fertility input. So sometimes we designed that entire hill farm. We fenced it based on contour, keeping hill slopes, soil types together, hilltops together, and your productive groundland together. But what it did, the sheep always camp on the high ground. So all those broomsedgy hills, I guess we've been on that farm for 3 years now. And because of making the sheep sleep on the sides of the hills, we're already seeing a difference, particularly at the top of the hill, where they've carried the manure up to the side instead of camping out on the top or the bottom. So, yeah, where they put their poop, we spend a fair amount of time thinking about.
Good deal. Greg, grading pastures, I know you spent a career doing that, helping people, kind of figure that out. And how do we start that process?
What you said, grading?
Yeah, I think that's what the question was about, kind
Okay.
of what are some key things that you would look at that they could track over time, I guess, as far as
Right.
making improvements. Sam mentioned grazing days, that would obviously be one of them. Are there others that you might?
Right. Well, desirable plants is a big one, and invasive plants. We have a big problem with nimblewheel, so we try to keep desirable grass above nimblewheel. Now, our cattle are eating nimblewheel pretty good, but it's still not a productive grass. And I know there's a big problem with sweet vernal grass. It's another invasive that we try to keep. We don't have much problem with it yet, but I've seen it come from the east and it's moving west. So desirable plants is the most important one, because if you don't have desirable plants, even though you got biomass, they're not eating it. So that's a big one. That pasture condition score is hard to beat for looking at 10 different indicators, and you score them all, and whichever one scores the lowest is where you should put some effort. And the top grazing managers, what I find typically is missing is residue management. They're doing a great job, and you're not knocking their program, but to make it better, a little bit of more residue on the surface could bring it to another level. So
not trying to take too much, try to leave something.
that's exactly right. I wanted to mention something. Sam reminded me of one thing I like to test organic matter, and for every 1% organic matter, you release 25 pounds of nitrogen. So now that's over the year, but 100 pounds of nitrogen is a pretty good program. So if you can get to 4%, it seems to be a sweet spot. So of course, I don't want to stop at 4%, but still, we're pretty far south, and it's with silt loam soils, it's hard to get much higher than 4.5 or 5%. At least that's what I've seen. Where clay soils, I'm seeing 6%. So anyway, you're limited. That's back to that reference state. How good can you get? But try to build organic matter, and the way you do that is lay more biomass down and poop down.
While we're talking about problem plants, I know, Greg, you mentioned nimblewheel. We got a question from Bruce here. Any problems with poisonous plants? And then it goes on to say, and the fungus in fescue. So a lot of you guys have got Kentucky 30, most of what you guys Kentucky 31, I would assume, of the fescue acres you do have, but if not, please elaborate on that. Greg,
Sam, why don't you start it off? And
there you go.
Yeah, I mean, not really, but we're always, we have a high diversity in our fescue pastures. In the summertime, it does get pretty rough on the lambs, I think, if you got too much fescue. But as long as you're moving them and watching them, usually you're not making them hungry enough to eat something poisonous. And every grazing talk I've ever heard, the Johnson grass prussic acid deal comes up, and we got Johnson grass all over the farm, and I've never worried about it a bit. Now, I mean, I won't kill some this fall, but it has to do with the diversity out there. And the other thing is, I've seen things that are supposedly on the deadly poison list that the animals will eat at certain phases and be fine. But I think it kind of goes back to, I don't force them to eat it. I don't starve them on a pasture and to make them eat it. And they seem to, at least mine, knock on wood, I haven't had an issue with poisonous plants, as long as there's plenty of diversity out there and they have other options.
That's a real good point. We have a lot of perilla mint, and if we graze too low, we'll release that perilla mint and it grows out. Usually it grows in the shade, but we'll even have it out in the middle of the field if we graze too low. And perilla mint is the most toxic plant in the East. But usually they won't eat it. Now, if we have held them in a corral and there was some perilla mint in there and they were held in there all day, they'd start eating it and they'd learn that they liked it and they go to the field and still eat it and they would die, and you could smell it on their breath. They die pretty quick. The treatment for it is activated charcoal, but rarely will you catch them soon enough to do that. Sam mentioned a lot of plants have toxins, and they do, like cocklebur, milkweed, but I'm not concerned in the least about them eating. I want them to eat cocklebur and milkweed. Yeah, I can't think of. And then the fescue, as long as it's vegetative, then there's less toxins in the fescue. In the top third grazing, they're getting to select and get what they need. So I think it's a management thing. And the lower you graze, the more toxins are in it in the fescue, especially in the spring, I believe.
The plant that's cousin could be labeled as a problem, but maybe this particular plant's maybe not a problem. Has anyone utilized or grazed thornless honey locusts, especially I've heard their pods, and the question relates to their pods. So thornless honey locusts. I know we've got honey locusts, but they are the tractor tire getting type.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm into silvopasture, so I know about Hershey. I may try some. The thing that we all need to be aware of if we plant thornless honey locusts is that there will be some that revert back to the thorn type, some of the progeny. So need to be aware of that. Now I have grazed the black locust and honey locust, just the native type, and they eat it real well. It's a legume. So it's just another forage. And it's one way you can grow some straighter trees if you graze it, after it's about, I don't know, 10 foot tall, 8 foot tall, then you'll get a little straighter trees if you don't let them get the crown. But that's an interesting area, the whole growing more pods and all. We're looking at doing persimmons, and that would be a fruit drop that some of the livestock would get. We've got a walnut silvopasture, and I'm interested in visiting with others about this, but what I'm seeing is it's like matua brome, it's persister brome or rescue grass. It seems to have a synergy with black walnut, and I'm looking forward to seeding that in. But I just see it naturally under black walnut, and it's just doing immensely better than anywhere else. So there must be some kind of synergy between the two.
Sam, you doing anything with silvopastures or?
Yeah, not with the honey locust. We had we did a big timber stand improvement project this year. We had a lot of some of the timber that had already been cut over and had grown back mostly an invasive species, and then we had some older hillside pastures that had been abandoned probably 30 years ago, and all they had was sort of junk softwood, hackberry, that kind of thing. So I'm pretty, pretty excited about to see. We did the hack and squirt this fall, and I'm going to use the sheet to graze underneath, and I'm hoping to, so what's left is oaks, walnuts, hickories, persimmons, all your good stuff, and I'm hoping that to be a very cheap way to create silvopasture that the sheep will be able to control the regrowth of the tree of heaven and Atlantis and stuff like that, and it'll end up being real pretty silvopasture. So
That does sound good. Question about this page has a meadow. Sounds like it's on the lower part of the farm that's in a wetland with skunk cabbage. I'm not familiar with skunk cabbage. Maybe someone on the webinar is. So then she asked questions about they're using some mesh fencing and T-post. She's kind of looking for a toxic plant resource and maybe what types of fencing might be good to, I assume maybe for probably a temporary or semi-permanent setup maybe in this wetland. I'm assuming that. So, and I know that was one of the questions I think I had for Sam and maybe Greg both, single strand or multi-strand poly wires versus net fencing. So what I saw, Sam, you had some of both. Greg, I know you've used some of both, but help kind of work us through the toxic plant part of that question. I would look at the Extension Service and NRCS publications for that area would be a good place to start. So, Greg, what about fencing? Maybe semi-permanent type.
Right. We've tried a lot of different ones. I like the 2 strands of poly the best if it'll hold them. You have to break them into electric first and in a real hot holding area and make sure they get shocked and then go to the field with less strands. I want to go back to that toxic plant thing too, before I say more about the electronet and all. Don't trust those toxic plant things in general. They're going to say everything's toxic. They're going to scare you to death. I've been on farms where they locked all their animals up and just held them because they were so afraid of Paralymint. Well, if it's grazed to the dirt, yeah, you maybe should be afraid, but don't be afraid of every plant out there. There's toxins in brassicas, and we plant them to graze, and they can be toxic if they're just eating brassica and get too much. But don't. A lot of it's over the top, I think. But they can be a good guide, but don't be concerned about every plant. But electronet, it's rather troublesome to put up and hangs on everything. You don't want to use it in the woods, but it's a very. I think every sheep farm should have at least a couple of rolls of it, and it's handy for a holding area, or to make them funnel into an area. But ideally on fence, I want permanent fence, parallel permanent fence, about 435 feet apart if that fits the landscape, and then use temporary wire to divide it up and have water where it can have water in every paddock. Now, sheep and goats, we can have portable water. That's a real thing for most operations. They only drink probably, the guides will say they'll drink up to maybe 3 gallons a day, but half gallon's usually about all they'll drink in a day. So yeah, portable water's a real thing.
Yeah, I'll just interject here that it is shocking how little water sheep will drink when they're on green forage. And when they start eating just only dry hay, it picks up some, but you're right, Greg. You know, I've always said I'd rather haul water to 1,000 sheep than one cow. I mean, it's not quite that bad, but I've hauled water to both, and man, it's no fun hauling water to a cow. So,
Right.
Sam, what about fencing, you know, in a sheep operation? Looks like you're using some of all of it.
Yeah, I would. Portable electric fencing seems like the answer to her question, but yeah, all of the above. Anytime the sheep are going to have pressure, either you're like we use netting a lot this time of year because the single wire, two wire, they'll see green and hop over it. Another nice thing about netting is that it'll keep predators out more than the other. So if you need to control the sheep, absolutely, netting's a great tool. But I think if you're in sheep for any amount of time, you'll have both the poly reels and the netting. So, and they
A
both.
couple of people I work with have just electronet. They don't have any permanent fence, perimeter fence.
Mhm.
They just use electronet and they hop across the land with that.
Yeah, we use a lot of electro netting. We graze some solar farms, you know, with our sheep. And of course, inside we could use 2 strands of, you know, poly wire with no problem. But sometimes it has a significant acreage outside of it. And, you know, if they breach the perimeter of that, they're in the highway. So we use netting there just because it is a little more substantial, even though we put them back in the solar farm at night, just in case something spooked them and they ran through the fence and ended up in the highway. That's never a good call to get. So, is electro netting usually solar charged? You really could be charged with a solar, you know, energizer or one plugged into the main power, either one, right? So, any thoughts there? Or?
Yeah. Anytime you've got a choice, use plug-in charger because it's more bang for the buck and cheaper, well, for the joules that you get. But buy the electronet that doesn't have a bottom hot wire. It's just a ground on the. You may need to add a few posts to it. Get the sheep electronet, not the poultry netting. It's way too heavy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There was another question here about netting and grounding. And there is a lot of resistance in that many strands of poly. So usually it does. I know the energizer, we use a 3 joule energizer. And joule is just a measure of output or energy. You know, it's kind of like horsepower on a tractor. And 2 ground rods are adequate, but and sometimes if we're grazing next to a solar farm, we'll tie into their grounding system, and they have a very substantial grounding system for their perimeter chain link fences. So that kind of helps us out there. But grounding is a critical component of any electric fence, and the bigger the energizer, the more ground it's usually looking for. And there's grounding is kind of related to soil type, where sandy or textured soils don't conduct electricity quite as good. So you need more grounding that way. So, Greg, what have I missed there, Sam? Either one, as far as electric fence setup. Any other tricks or?
Yeah. Well, if it's permanent uh, charger, then you want 3 ground rods minimum, 6 foot in the ground, 10 foot apart. But then you can put a steel post on the fence and I think it's about 300 foot away, and then test your ground rods, and they shouldn't have more than 500 volts on them. Then if they do, you need to add more ground rods. I added a ground rod to a system the other day and got 1,000 more volts out of it. So
Yeah, that grounding's a real deal. There's some looks like there's some skunk cabbage information there in the chat. Talks about it could be a risk for birth defects. So yeah, do a little local research there to make sure we're not setting ourselves up for some challenges, grazing skunk cabbage. So
I did have
So-
a quick question, and this, I guess, could lead to a long answer, but maybe give us your elevator pitch in relation to this topic. But yeah, I think a lot of folks maybe on here have maybe smaller flock sizes. Maybe they're just getting started. Maybe they don't even have sheep or goats yet. Could you all share maybe how you got started in the business, and maybe a little bit of historical context on how you got to the size of operation you are today? And did it start from a grass-based system from day one, or maybe did it transition to that with time?
Sam, you want to start, or I've been talking.
Sure. So no, we did not start out at the scale we're at. Grew up on a relatively small beef cattle operation, and actually while I was in college, my parents went to an RCS grazing seminar and heard Jim Garris speak and said you could add a ewe for every cow and not reduce your stocking rate. So that's kind of how we got into it. We got up to about 200 ewes. Once you get anything less than 200 ewes, and the sheep will seem easy, and then you'll try to grow fast, and you'll bring in all kinds of trouble like we did, and you'll have a train wreck. So, but um, but basically, we have since that first wreck, I guess that was back in 2014, we brought in hoof rot, right? Like we'd never had any issues with our sheep. All these things are easy, and then we brought in hoof rot, and we were up to, I guess, about 800 and called back down to 400 or 100. But then since that time, 2015, we've basically been closed. So at least as far as the sheep goes, we've grown slowly and just taken each year to sort of figure out, well, now we're lambing 500. Let's see what that looks like. I will say, I think if you're not going for that scale, I think in the Southeast or just generally, sheep are a better opportunity than cattle right now. The things I love about them is that the family, I can take my kids out there and we can all work together and not worry about somebody getting hurt as much. On a per acre basis, the reason that we're bullish on sheep is they, and profitability wise, assuming you can keep them alive and execute, they can be much better than cattle, especially on smaller acreages. So that's sort of our sheep story in a nutshell.
Yeah, when I started, there wasn't many available in the area, and this is back in 2000. And you could just buy 5 at a time or something like that. And we probably jumped in a little quick, but started with 70, and they came from out west, which is a no-no. Moving animals from a dry climate to a wet climate usually isn't a good idea. So anyway, they got foot rot and they worms, and anyway, it wasn't very pretty. My brother dropped out, and he sold his part of that was goats. And the saying is, to appreciate sheep, you need to have goats first. But yeah, so, and then we culled through it. There's another saying is, when they quit dying, you'll be in the sheep business or goat business. But um, now they're real stable and not any issues to speak of. Yeah, so best buy from somebody in your area and that manages like you do. So other than that, I don't know. And there's good animals in every breed. I have Katahdin too, but I know some people with Dorper and with wool sheep, and there's you can have good in any of them, good and bad.
And then one kind of follow-up question, I don't know if it's technically a follow-up question, but building on kind of the grass-based and making animals adapted to your environment. I was just curious, what are your average ewe weights? How big are they, and how does that play into making sure they get by on pretty much grass alone?
Yeah, mine are about 110 or so pounds. You don't want the high performance animals, the ones that are gaining 9 pounds a day. Usually they're not going to hold up in an all grass environment. I think that's what you're getting at there. I have bought some rams like that, and I think I improved the flock by adding that kind of genetics, high performance, but you can get too much performance, and you need to feed those animals for the performance that they need. Maybe too much milk. They need have a higher energy demand, and you can't get that much energy from grass alone unless you're really on top of your game, and not many people are. So.
Yeah, you really need to know what your goals are when you start. But if you want to be a grass-based operation, there's definitely a type of sheep that you need. So like Greg said, buying sheep, starting with sheep from someone who's doing it like you want to do is very important. It seems like our environment grows a 120-pound ewe. That's sort of what our mature ewes are weighing, and we have strictly focused on maternal qualities, parasite resistance, twinning, getting, living without having to be fed and propped up, living without having to be wormed. We track all the ewes that we have to worm more than once, and they're sort of already on the cull list. We select our replacements from only ewes that have twinned multiple years in a row. But at any rate, that ewe, like Greg's saying though, is going to make a finished lamb that doesn't fit all markets either. It happens to fit the ethnic market, which is sort of what drives the sheep market in the East anyways, but it's not the ewe for every environment, but it is the one for our high rainfall, high humidity, where we live. So.
Yeah, on the marketing in this area, if you're going to the auction barn, you want them less than 70 pounds. If you're direct marketing to the public and doing cuts, we want them about 100 pounds. And it takes here with just grass and without winter or annuals, it'll take really a year to get there. The last 30 pounds takes a good while to put on.
Sam, what's the age on yours? Because you're feeding a little harder, and
Yeah.
what difference does that make?
We're shooting for 110-pound average live weight on the finished lambs, and the first load's been, our average lambing date was May 1st last year, and the first load went out at the end of October. So, and the last load went out January 30th. So, but that's, being on pasture, clean pasture with access to feed.
With the feed, the gains are about 3 times higher, aren't they, Sam?
Yeah. I mean, back when we were grass finishing, it was taking us a year on the lambs, like you were saying, basically to get them to that weight. And I've often thought if we ever stopped growing and our market demanded a more meatier, growthier, a bigger animal, we'd do a terminal cross. If we needed to change the lambs and get them to grow faster, but doesn't seem to be a need right now.
Right. Since we're direct marketing, we may do some of that with Dorper or wool cross.
Other questions? Comments? Question I'd have for both of you guys, and I'm kind of looking for that one thing. It can be a product, practice, principle, state of mind, whatever it is, but what one thing, and again, taking us back to nutrition, grazing, you know, what is the one thing that you guys just feel really strongly about that is very important to have as part of your operation as it relates to nutrition or grazing? You know, what is that one thing?
It's the grass. We need, if we, this year I'm doing different because I'm trying to build up that CREP ground or CRP ground and bring it back to life. But in general, if you've got something for them to graze, they're going to do wonderfully. And like Sam mentioned there, they'll do so good that you'll increase the stocking rate and then they may fall apart. It's like a cliff after you get to a certain stocking rate if you don't maintain the grass. But it's that balance of grass and stocking rate is really important. The type of sheep too.
Pull down just one thing, I know.
Yeah, one thing's pretty tough. I guess if I could say one thing is that there's not one thing. You'll try to follow somebody or copy somebody on YouTube, and your farm's just going to be, it'll be a little bit the same, but it will be different. So I guess my one thing would be sort of daily observation and knowing your animals and your grass.
It's a good one as well. Well, we could keep moving on, but if there's no questions, other questions from the group, I do think, and Adam want to help me with this, I do think we have a short survey at the end. And Adam, how do we make that happen?
I'm getting to that right now. I'm gonna set a poll out, and so if you don't mind, just answer those couple of questions. I think there's 3 of them. They should be up now.
Everybody's time being on this evening, and wouldn't mind filling out this evaluation for us. Certainly help us plan the next one.
And if you got on before you got a chance to put in where you're from, if you don't mind just putting in the chat where you're from, so we kind of keep a note on where everybody's at, would very, very well appreciate it.
I think our next webinar will be coming up next month, I believe. And what are we talking about then, Dr. Weaver?
It'll be genetics. So that'll round out our webinar series. So selection
Genetics,
programs and breeding sheep that work for our various different types of environments. So I think it'll should build off this webinar pretty well.
Good deal. Well, I want to say a big thank you to Sam Kennedy and Greg Brann for both being here this evening. Y'all have done a great job. Gave us all a lot of things to think about. Appreciate you giving us a kind of a close look at your operation as it relates to nutrition and grazing management. And we'll look forward to seeing each one of you all on a webinar in the future.